It must be really hard to have a marital status when you're missing all that color. Here's your spooky spot in the NECA Toys Universal Monsters, the black and white Ultimate Bride of Frankenstein. The debut of Universal's 1935 film, The Bride of Frankenstein, promises audiences something more fearful than the monster himself. Elsa Lanchester's portrayal of the creature as stitched together to be the monster's mate is captured in this detailed 7-inch scale ultimate action figure. This figure is presented in movie-authentic black and white and comes with bandages, removable gown, 2 pairs of hands, and 3 interchangeable head sculpts. Now, just before we have a ghoulish look at Frankie's black and white bride, I'd like to first thank the folks over at NECA Toys who did provide this. Oh, I thought there was a wolfman outside. That did provide this sample of the black and white Bride of Frankenstein that we could have a look at in this review. I'll also bring in a second. I keep swearing I'm hearing animal noises outside. I'm sure it's fine. Of course, we're going to also bring in the colorized version of the Bride of Frankenstein more in a moment, but also as well, let's grab the tape measure and see how tall it stands. With the beehive, Bride is actually still quite a tall figure. She's 7.5 inches in height, or the figure's 19 centimeters tall. Sliding now in her sewn-together spouse, here's what the Bride of Frankenstein in black and white looks like also with the black and white Frankenstein's monster. A fitful pairing, I feel. If you're going to have really the black and white Frankenstein, then it would probably make the most logical sense. Not that I have to tell you really how to display your shelf. You can have the figures displayed any which way you want. But I would imagine if you're going to have black and white Frankenstein's monster, then you're probably going to be on the search for getting the bride to go along with that in that same color scheme. If, though, you still prefer, you're a stickler on color, then if you want to still have the Bride of Frankenstein, though all presented in color, here's also what she looks like with the colorized version. Fitting, the ironic thing about it, though, is I've noticed that the black and white has all still the same body build, and yet she seems to stand a lot easier than the colorized version of Bride of Frankenstein, who, as you can see, has already taken a tumble. They say you can measure a man, but in this case we'll measure a woman by the sum of her parts. And like the parts that got packed along with the colorized version, so happens to be also the same parts that got packed along with the black and white version of the Bride of Frankenstein. 3, in fact, swappable head sculpts. One just happens to be already attached onto the body. She comes also as well with a wrapped up piece that covers over the front of her face. And she also comes with some additional bandages and hands. Working backwards in that order, let's first have a look at the figure's hands. Sort of my same problem I had with the other figure was the fact that while I do appreciate the fact that she has hands like this, the hands are quite flat though. I would have preferred just a little bit of relaxation in those fingers so that the hands are kind of like more like this and not like this. Still, though, they are nicely bandaged up. You can see this time around, of course, devoid of all the color whatsoever. If you prefer, though, your Bride of Frankenstein, which I did mention when we looked at the colorized version of the Bride, that while I did love the look of the Bride, I prefer the look of her actually being more black and white. And I think there's something to be said about the features on her, especially on her face. I think pop a little bit better here on the black and white. Again, we're going to talk more about that in a moment. So she comes included with these hands. The defaulted hands, by the way, are kind of more parallel or kind of flatter to her body. I'm just going to, in fact, pick up the figure so you can see what I'm talking about. I mean, these hands are fine for what they are. I mean, they're actually kind of good to, if you want to have the arms kind of bent inward. If she's sort of lying down on the table. If you already have the Frankenstein's accessory set that just happened to come included with the lab table that we looked at, I actually brought in the review for the colorized version of Bride of Frankenstein. Yeah, you can actually have the hands kind of more against her body. Just kind of, like, you know, again, like resting like that. But if you did want to change out the hands, it's just a case of just wiggling these and removing them from the provided forearms, just like that. And we're just going to replace them with then the other hands. Now, while again, like I appreciate the fact that we get these other hands, still though I would have loved if the hands were just a little bit more relaxed, because they just seem like they're a little bit too flat for my liking. The figure also comes included with a couple of bandages. The bandages themselves, I mean, there really isn't a rhyme nor reason as to whereabouts they have to go. They're just kind of looped up plastic that just wrap around the figure's body. Preferably, I would imagine, right around the arms. But basically, you just drape them around the arms. Sticklers to detail, I'm sure we'll probably look online and probably check out the movie. We'll be definitely checking out The Bride of Frankenstein this Halloween season. And probably could say, like, the bandages are specifically going to go here, or they have to go here. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You can just really just drape them anywhere. I will say, though, that one bandage is notably smaller, not long as in length, as in this one. Like, you have one that's a little bit shorter here, and again, they just drape around the arms, any which way that you want to put them. The figure also, like I said, comes included with some swappable heads. Now, the defaulted head, I did do things kind of a little bit different this time around when we did have a look at the colorized version. I sort of started her all bandaged up, and then I kind of turned her into the Bride of Frankenstein. I figured this time around we would actually kind of look at the defaulted head, because I really think it's one of the stars of this. I mean, all the head sculpts are really quite good, but bearing the most likeness, I feel, to actress Elsa Lanchester, I think this one really looks the best. Now, just to bring back in the colorized version and show you guys the difference between the two, there's something to be said for the fact that if you have a character that's black and white on the silver screen, I think it actually looks better to have the figure in black and white. That's just my own personal opinion. More media and all the posters that would follow up afterwards would all kind of depict the bride more in color. But if you kind of want the more classic look to the bride, I definitely feel like the black and white handles things a little bit better. Like, the features are the same, and you could even argue the point that there's a little bit more detailing happening for her face because she's got a little bit more kind of blush and kind of a little more rosier colors to her face. There's definitely a lot more of that, a lot lacking in that, I would definitely say, when it comes to the black and white version. But I still, actually looking at the two, I think I like the black and white Bride of Frankenstein a little bit more. I think a lot of it also has to do with the coloring of her hair, because most of the time when I consider the Bride of Frankenstein, I always picture her to have more dark black hair with a silver streak on the side. The colorized version, of course, approached that more kind of a brown color, and while it isn't necessarily a bad head sculpt at all, I still prefer, I think, the black and white between the two. Now, of course, you can change out the head sculpts. The thing I really like also about this figure is the simplicity of changing out the heads. Instead of having to worry about fighting a ball joint and then trying to put it back in place, it's only simply a case where you're just going to take the head and you're going to remove it all together with the neck. The neck is just attached by a peg. It's not even so much a perfect square peg or rectangular peg either. You can see, like, there's a little notation, a little corner taken away, that it has to fit a specific way. I mean, obviously you're not going to fit it this way. You know, I guess you could technically fit it this way and turn the head around, but there is only really one way to attach it in place. Now, if you wanted, for example, to have the screaming head, it's, again, just going to line everything up and fit that into the provided hole, and now you got yourself this screaming Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. Of course, her looking over and realizing, oh, seriously, is this the guy I'm going to marry? Ah! Love the look of this head sculpt. Again, like the stitching there on the side of the face. The original one, by the way, also had that also as well. But the difference between the two, obviously the hair, like mentioned already before, has more of a fanned out look on the screaming head versus kind of a little more compact on the neutral expression face. Again, like, it's just that simple. The sculpting is exactly the same, so they haven't done anything differently necessarily. But I feel like, as I'm going to bring back in the colorized version, there's something to be said about the fact that this is all done in black and white, that I feel like it just evokes the most look to the Bride of Frankenstein. The colorized version was good, and I'm still happy to have picked up that figure, but loving the look of the black and white, though. Now, again, if you wanted to have this in the bandage look, all you'll really have to do is, first of all, remove the head, and while the head's gone away, just kind of bring those arms up just a little bit, as you'll want to take the gown off. The gown, by the way, is kind of more of a stretchier nylon material that they would have used. It does, of course, just fit over top of her body. You kind of have to pull it through her arms. Sometimes you may even have to kind of invert it or flip it inside out to get it around the arms. But you want to make sure the whole time you're doing it that you're not actually pulling and separating those stitches. Because, of course, you wouldn't want to have to try to stitch those back together or, like, feed them back together. We're just going to pull these all off. I'm going to put the dress just to the side for right now. And then we're going to bring in the bandaged face, which really, again, just to bring back in the original one, is no different than before. Obviously, just one is black and white, one is color. And really, you don't get the chance as much to experience the likeness that the sculptors over at NECA put into these pieces by looking at the bandage head. But again, if you wanted to have the figure displayed, you're just kind of line up the hole, peg to the hole, fit that in place, and now you can have the bandage version of the Bride of Frankenstein. The other thing, of course, the figure also comes included with as well is the little piece that covers over top of her face. If you look at the inside of it, you can kind of see how everything lines up. It's basically just supposed to fit around her nose. Just fit that over top of the face. You don't have to really apply enough pressure. I mean, like, it fits fairly well in place without really even have to force it on there. But it does, of course, if you want to have her bandage, that would then be the, a way that you want to display the figure. And then, of course, you can just kind of bring the arms inward, and she could be resting on top of Frankie's table. Obviously, I'm not going to be doing that, but I did want to show you at least how that would work. Let's go ahead and just remove this right now. I want to show you guys the detail work for the rest of the figure's body. All in all, like, it looks really good. I would have to go back and look at the movie. This strange placement of one little lone bandage, while all the others are sort of wrapping around her body. She has this kind of one little area that looks like it would be a name tag, like we just say bride, just bride across the front of it. The sculpting, though, of just the way they've bound the body looks fantastic. This is the part, of course, in this review you would never really get the chance to see if you have the dress always on the figure's body. The gown that she wears, of course, hides so much the detail work that the talented artists over at NECA would sculpt into this figure. Still, it has the problem, though, with the feet not being being completely flat. Of course, they have sculpted around the wrapping area here. So, of course, the feet aren't completely flat, and they, for some reason, decided to leave peg holes on the undersides of her feet off. So I'm not sure why they just didn't put the peg holes on the bottom. So at least if you had any difficult time to get the figure to stand like I've had, at least with the colorized version, maybe not as much with black and white, you could then just attach onto like just a display stand. Just, you know, I don't know why they wouldn't have put that in there in the first place. But let's go ahead. Actually, you know what? Just before we actually put everything back onto the bride, I want to show you guys the articulation for the figure. It doesn't really necessarily matter that it's this head, because the head's going to work exactly the same. It's on a ball joint, so it rotates all the way around. The head can look up only that far and can look down. Okay. We'll pop this head off just in case you did want to see what it looks like with a defaulted head. It does look a little odd, of course, with her missing her gown, but yeah, the articulation, head looks up this far and looks down that low. You can also rock the head back and forth as well. And of course, yeah, you can rotate all the way around as well. Arms rotate forward and back. There is still going to be that section of shoulder that's still softer plastic, but it's going to cause a little bit more reluctancy when it comes to trying to rotate the arm all the way around. You take those arms, you can also hinge them out at 90 degrees, almost 90 degrees. She has a single hinge only in the elbow. You can at least rotate the arm back and forth, and you can rotate the hands all the way around, hinging those back and forth as well. The upper torso is on a very generous ball joint, which again, you'd only really get the chance to experience once the gown is taken off. You could still go in there and rotate it, but for me, at least as a reviewer, it'd be kind of hard to show you guys all the points of articulation while still keeping the robe over top, or keeping the dress that she has over top. So it does move up, it does move down actually quite far, and you can rock it back and forth as well. Legs do split out. They seem to be using, once again, ball joints on the inside cavity of the thigh. You can take the legs and move forward. You can move them back. There's a mild, very mild swivel at the top of the thigh. Single hinge only for the knee. That also allows the lower leg to rotate. And the ankle moves up and down this way. And you can also rock it back and forth as well. So it's all in all just a great looking bride. I never had any real issues with the colorized, other than just the fact that honestly, it was just colorized. I still love, for me at least, the black and white version. It usually is the case, I mean, for most of the figures that I already have, as I'm going ahead and trying to dress her up right now, most of the Universal figures that I have right now, the only real exception to that is Dracula, because I don't have the black and white version of Dracula yet. But I'm really generally more attracted, I feel, to the black and white versions of these figures. Just again, because, let me just flip this around, I want to make sure I've got this facing the right way. Just because, again, like, generally when you see them on the silver screen, they're exactly that. They're black and white. So to get this in a black and white version, while I did really like the colorized version, I really appreciate more so getting the Bride of Frankenstein on my shelf in black and white. Again, I'm still having a tough time. The thing about it, though, is when trying to get the robe back in place, you want to make sure, of course, you're getting around her head, but you want to make sure that the hands, first of all, are fitted into those holes. I feel like I'm getting all tied up here. You know what? Let's do it this way. Let's straight. There we go. Get the hand in the one side. I was having such a tough time doing this. And then get the other hand then on the other side. There we go. And also, the reason why I did want to do this now is also to show you guys when you are getting this back onto her body, just kind of be careful getting it around the elbow area. And of course, you want to make sure that this whole time that you're not going to be unlacing all the additional threading that they've got on the back. And of course, when that's all finally said and done, it's all finished and ready to go, get ourselves back. Let's just get back the neutral head sculpt back in place. Now we've got ourselves the Bride of Frankenstein all good to go. Really, again, I like the look of the black and white. I mean, for me, personal preference. I mean, you might just prefer to have the colorized version because there's a lot of color. There's a lot more, not necessarily wow to the figure by having her colorized, but there's definitely a lot more for your eye to hone in on when you're looking at the colorized version versus the black and white. Still, strangely, though, the colorized version for me has a harder time to balance. I don't know why that is. The feet, I would imagine, would be exactly the same. But comparing the two, obviously in this case, you've got black and white version, you've got the colorized version. You guys can certainly let me know down below in the comment section which you prefer. The only thing I will say, though, about it, which I didn't talk too much about in this review, but I'll kind of mention it before we kind of wrap things up, so to speak, is actually the wrappings of her body are a little not quite the same shade of gray as maybe her face. Now, obviously, this is all going to be black and white, the way she would have been presented in the movie, but I find like the wrappings aren't quite the same sort of color scheme as her face. Other than that, though, I'm really happy how the black and white version of Bride of Frankenstein turned out. Still happy to have picked up the colorized version. But it's, for me at least, when it comes to displaying this, I'm really looking forward to having this one on display with the black and white Wolfman that we've already had a look at, the black and white Frankenstein's monster. I mean, again, the only one I really have yet to pick up for black and white other than Dracula is also the Mummy. I'm going to have to definitely get around to getting that one picked up, and I can have all the black and white Universal monsters on display on my shelf. Unless I do get around to picking up a third Bride of Frankenstein, and I'm sure it's probably going to end up happening, I don't really have a desired interest to have the figures displayed with the wrapped up face. I did mention that also, I think, when we looked at the colorized version. While it's always appreciative that a company like NECA Toys would include as many things as they do with their figures, I mean, obviously for me, I would rather either have the Bride of Frankenstein in her yelling pose, which we're sort of wrapping things up. I see what I did there. Wrapping things up here in final looks with, or the more neutral expression. I actually think the head sculpt looks better black and white with a neutral expression, and maybe what I'll then do is have the screaming face with the colorized version also the way to differentiate the two figures, not just simply by the color scheme that the plastic has. The colors of this one obviously don't have as many as obviously the colorized version that we've already had a look at, but still I feel like the black and white gives us a better looking Bride of Frankenstein. Some of that may also have some biasness. Obviously, I'm just a fan of the way that Bride of Frankenstein looks like with no colors on the silver screen. And also, I think, too, with the beehive being black like this, I think it looks more like the Bride of Frankenstein than the brown look that they went with the colorized version. Now, again, like a lot of that's based on the way the posters looked. The media would follow up after the movie as well, that they would also use color. Now, obviously, that figure represents the colorized versions of all the media that would follow after the film. But for me, at least, I would go back to the basics of the way the movie would have looked. And I prefer my Bride of Frankenstein to be black and white, not necessarily color. Of the two Bride of Frankensteins now that we've had the chance to have a look at, which do you guys honestly prefer? Do you like this one or do you like the black and white? Let me know down below in the comments section. Also, once again, I'd like to thank the folks over at NECA Toys that did provide this sample of the colorized ultimate Bride of Frankenstein that we had the chance to have a look at in this review. Speaking, though, of reviews, if you don't mind me saying, if you guys enjoyed finishing or enjoyed watching the one you just finished watching, why not hit it with a like? But if you guys are also loving the content you guys are seeing and you would like to be on board for more NECA Universal Monster reviews, just an FYI, though, during this spooky season, we will also be looking at the Phantom of the Opera, and we will also be looking at the Creature from the Black Lagoon. So there's a couple of other Universal Monster reviews coming your way during the month of Spottober. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.